Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Signals in the static. I've been alone at the decommissioned Blackrock weather station for 19 days. 19 days of howling wind, creaking metal, and equipment that refuses to stay powered down. The helicopter dropped me here with enough supplies to last a month. My job was simple: document the condition of the facility, catalog any salvageable equipment, and prepare a report for the National Weather Service before they send in the demolition team. A straightforward assignment that would take 3 weeks tops. Just needs a final assessment, my supervisor had said. The place has been abandoned for almost 3 years. Power's been cut, but we've got a generator for you. Don't waste fuel, you'll only need electricity for your laptop and maybe some lights at night. Blackrock sits on a remote peninsula jutting into the North Atlantic. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and the only reliable access is by air. The station was built in the 1970s to monitor coastal weather patterns, but budget cuts and automation made it obsolete. Newer, more efficient systems rendered the human-operated station unnecessary. I arrived on a clear October morning. The helicopter pilot seemed anxious to leave, barely waiting for me to unload my gear before taking off again. I watched it disappear over the horizon, feeling the first pang of isolation settle in my chest. The station itself is a collection of utilitarian buildings, a 2-story main structure with living quarters and offices, a small equipment shed, and the observation tower with its weather instruments. Everything is painted a dull gray that blends with the perpetually overcast sky. My first 3 days were productive. I inventoried the main building, photographing water damage, testing door hinges, noting which furniture could be salvaged. The place was in better condition than expected. No signs of vandalism or animal infestation, just dust, silence, and the lingering smell of abandonment. On the 4th day, I moved to the observation tower. That's when things began to change. I'd powered up the generator that morning, just enough to charge my laptop and camera. As I climbed the metal stairs to the tower, I heard a sound that made me freeze, a low electronic hum. The kind made by equipment receiving power. The observation room was a circular space with windows facing all directions, giving a 360-degree view of the peninsula and ocean beyond. Weather instruments lined the walls: barometers, anemometers, hygrometers, and a bank of monitors for displaying data. All of it should have been dead, but the main console was illuminated, green and red lights blinking in sequence. The radar display screen flickered with static. I checked my generator setup, convinced I'd somehow connected it to the station's electrical system. But no, the generator was powering only the outlets in the living quarters, exactly as I'd set it up. The tower had its own power source, one that should have been disconnected years ago. I shut everything down manually, flipping every switch to the off position. The lights died, the humming stopped, and I stood in the silent tower, listening to my own breathing and the distant crash of waves. In my report that night, I noted the anomaly, suggesting that perhaps the shutdown procedure had never been properly completed. I attached photos of the active equipment and moved on with my inventory. The next morning, everything was on again. Not just on, the equipment was active. The radar screen displayed weather patterns. The barometric pressure gauge was fluctuating. The temperature sensors were recording data. I shut it all down again, more carefully this time, making sure every power switch was firmly in the off position. I even located the main breaker panel for the tower and cut power there. That night, a storm rolled in. The kind of Atlantic fury that makes you grateful for solid walls and a roof. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind moaned through the weather vanes and antenna arrays on the roof. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of a voice. It came through the walls, muffled but distinct, a voice speaking in measured tones, as if delivering a report. I couldn't make out the words, just the cadence of professional speech. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound to the tower. The stairway felt longer in the dark, my footsteps echoing metallically as I climbed. The voice grew clearer with each step. Low pressure system moving northeast at approximately 20 knots. Barometric pressure continues to drop. Wind speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour with gusts approaching 70. It was coming from the observation room, a weather report delivered in a flat, affectless voice, a man's voice, deep and slightly nasal. The room was dark when I entered, but the radar screen provided enough illumination to see that I was alone. The voice continued, now emanating clearly from the communications console, an old radio setup that would have been used to transmit observations to other stations and meteorological centers. Precipitation levels exceeding 2 inches per hour. Lightning activity increasing. All vessels advised to seek immediate shelter. I stood frozen, watching the radar screen display the storm system in real time. The voice described exactly what the instruments were recording. A perfect weather report from a decommissioned station that shouldn't have had power, delivered by someone who wasn't there. I hit the power switch on the communications console. The voice stopped mid-sentence. The radar screen went dark. The only sound was the storm and my ragged breathing. I backed out of the room, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, telling myself it was an automated system, some backup protocol that activated during severe weather. Nothing more, but automated systems don't improvise. They don't pause to clear their throats. They don't sound like they're reading from notes. In the morning, I called my supervisor on the satellite phone. The connection was poor, his voice breaking up in the aftermath of the storm. Can't hear you clearly. What about the equipment? It's powering itself on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And there's some kind of automated weather reporting system still functioning. That's impossible, he replied, his voice fading in and out. Everything was decommissioned. Backup batteries would be dead after 3 years. Well, something's still active. I need to know if there's an auxiliary power system I don't know about. No auxiliary, complete shutdown. Might be residual charge in capacitors, but nothing that would last. The connection deteriorated further, his voice disappearing into static. Before it cut out completely, I heard him say, "Don't waste time on it. Just finish the inventory." I spent that day avoiding the tower, focusing instead on the equipment shed. But as evening approached, I found myself drawn back to the observation room. I needed to understand what was happening. Everything was off when I entered, just as I'd left it. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by dark screens and silent instruments, and spoke aloud. "Is someone here?" My voice sounded small in the circular room. No response came. I felt foolish, but pressed on. "I heard a voice last night, a weather report. This station is decommissioned. There shouldn't be anyone broadcasting." Silence, just the wind outside and the distant ocean. I sighed and turned to leave. That's when the radar screen flickered to life behind me. It wasn't displaying weather patterns this time, just static. But within the static, shapes seemed to move, darker patches that shifted and flowed like ink in water. The communications console crackled. A voice emerged from the static, different from the one I'd heard before. This one was higher, strained, as if speaking through clenched teeth. Not decommissioned, still operational. Still needed. I approached the console slowly. "Who is this? How are you transmitting?" Transmitting, always watching, the patterns, the systems. The static increased, nearly drowning out the voice. I leaned closer. They didn't understand the importance, what we found. "Found what?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" "Michaels, senior meteorologist, Blackrock Station." I knew that name. It was in the documentation I'd received. Dr. Raymond Michaels, the last senior meteorologist assigned to Blackrock before its closure. According to the file, he'd retired when the station was decommissioned. Dr. Michaels. "How are you communicating with this equipment? It's powered down." The laugh that came through the speaker made my skin crawl, a harsh, brittle sound that broke into static. "Never powers down, not really. They think they shut it off, but it's listening, always listening." The radar screen's static patterns were moving more deliberately now, almost like a language of shifting shadows. Discovered something, in the patterns, in the data. Something watching us through the storms. The voice faded, overtaken by static. I adjusted the dials on the console, trying to clarify the signal, but it only made the static louder. Within the noise, I could barely make out words. "They come through the systems, hide in the weather, using our instruments to watch." The static surged, then cleared suddenly, the voice coming through with startling clarity. "They're aware of you now, you've been noticed." The console went dead. The radar screen blinked off. I stood in the dark observation room, the words echoing in my mind. That night I couldn't sleep. I reviewed the station's documentation, searching for information about Dr. Michaels. There wasn't much, just his employment record and a brief note about his retirement coinciding with the station's closure. Nothing unusual. I connected my laptop to the satellite link and searched online news archives for any mention of him. One result appeared, a small article from a local newspaper dated 3 months after the station's official closure. "Former Blackrock meteorologist found dead." The article was brief. Dr. Raymond Michaels, 58, had been found in his home after neighbors reported not seeing him for several days. The cause of death was listed as suicide. The only unusual detail was that his home office was filled with weather maps and printouts of radar data. The article quoted a colleague saying Michaels had become obsessed with certain weather patterns in his final months at Blackrock. I closed my laptop, my mind racing. A meteorologist becomes obsessed with weather patterns, continues his work after retirement, then takes his own life. And now, 3 years later, the equipment at his former station won't stay powered down. The next day, I forced myself to continue the inventory. Professional responsibility overrode my growing unease. I worked methodically, room by room, noting conditions and photographing everything. But my attention kept drifting to the tower, to the instruments that seemed to have a life of their own. That afternoon, a fog rolled in from the ocean, thick gray mist that reduced visibility to a few feet. The air felt heavy with moisture, clinging to my skin as I made my final checks of the day. I was in the main building when all the lights came on, not just the observation tower this time. Every light in the station blazed to life. Computers hummed, ventilation fans spun up, and the heating system kicked on with a mechanical groan. I ran to my generator, certain it must be overloading, but it was running normally, still connected only to my personal equipment. The station was drawing power from somewhere else. The intercom system crackled to life. The same nasal voice from before echoed through the empty hallways. Attention all personnel, weather anomaly detected, category undefined. All staff report to observation tower immediately for emergency protocol implementation. I stood frozen in the corridor, watching the overhead lights flicker. The voice repeated its message, then fell silent. I should have barricaded myself in the living quarters. I should have called for emergency evacuation on the satellite phone. Instead, I found myself climbing the tower stairs, drawn by a need to understand what was happening. The observation room was fully activated, every screen, every instrument, every light. The radar display showed the fog bank surrounding the station, but there was something wrong with the image. The fog didn't move naturally. It pulsed, contracted, expanded like something breathing. The communications console was alive with voices, multiple channels of static-filled chatter. I could make out fragments. ... Confirmed visual at bearing 242. Structure appears to be forming within the cloud mass. Losing contact with monitoring buoys. Pattern matches the November event. I recognized Dr. Michael's voice among them, more agitated than before. ... It's responding to our observations, changes behavior when monitored, exhibiting intelligence. Another voice cut through, calm and authoritative. Shutdown protocol initiated, all data to be quarantined. Repeat full shutdown of monitoring systems. It uses our instruments to perceive our world. The voices faded to static. The radar screen showed the fog pressing against the building, tendrils of mist seeming to probe at the windows. I approached the main console, drawn by a flashing red button labeled Emergency Shutdown. Without thinking, I pressed it. Everything went dark. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by my breathing and the soft patter of mist against glass. Then my flashlight flickered and died. My watch stopped. The battery-powered emergency lights that should have activated remained dark. Something had drained all power from the station, even from devices that weren't connected to the main systems. In the perfect darkness, I heard a sound that wasn't the wind or the ocean. A soft, wet sound like something large moving across glass. It came from the observation room windows. I fumbled for my phone, activating the screen for light. In its pale glow, I saw the windows were completely obscured by fog, but this fog moved differently than any natural phenomenon. It pressed against the glass with purpose, forming shapes that almost resembled hands. My phone died next, plunging me back into darkness. But before the screen went black, I saw something in the fog, a darker shape within the gray, something with depth and dimension that shouldn't have been there. I retreated by feel, backing toward where I knew the door to be. My hands found the frame, then the handle. I pulled it open and stumbled onto the landing. The emergency lights in the stairwell were functioning, casting a dim red glow. I descended as quickly as I dared, the metal steps clanging under my feet. In the main building, I gathered my essential supplies: the satellite phone, my laptop, emergency rations, a flashlight with fresh batteries. The phone showed no signal, but I kept it anyway. My watch remained frozen at 4:17 p.m. That night, I barricaded myself in the small equipment shed, the only building I hadn't fully inventoried yet. It had a single window and a solid door I could secure. I sat in the dark, listening to the fog press against the walls. The new flashlight worked, but its beam seemed weaker than it should have been, as if something in the air was consuming its light. I used it sparingly, preserving the batteries. Hours passed. Occasionally, the radio I'd brought crackled with voices, fragments of weather reports, technical discussions, urgent warnings. Always the same voices, including Dr. Michael's, repeating the same observations about patterns, intelligence, and watching. Near dawn, a new voice came through the radio, my own. Day 20 at Blackrock Station. The fog hasn't dissipated. Equipment continues to activate independently. I'm observing unusual patterns in the radar data. I hadn't recorded any such log. I hadn't spoken those words. Yet there was my voice, continuing a report I'd never made. The patterns suggest intelligence, not weather, but something using weather as a medium, something that's been watching us through our own monitoring systems. I shut off the radio, my hands shaking. The voice stopped, but I could still hear it in my mind, speaking words I hadn't yet said but somehow knew I would. When morning came, the fog remained. I ventured out cautiously, making my way to the main building to check the satellite phone again. Still no signal. The observation tower loomed above, its windows now clear of fog but reflecting the gray sky in a way that made them appear as blank eyes watching the peninsula. I needed to leave. The helicopter wasn't scheduled to return for another week, but the satellite phone could summon it earlier if I could get a signal. I climbed to the roof of the main building, hoping the higher elevation would help. Standing on the roof, phone raised to the sky, I saw something that stopped my breath. The fog hadn't dissipated, it had pulled back, forming a perfect circle around the station. A wall of gray mist stood about 100 yards out in all directions, unnaturally vertical and still despite the coastal breeze. As I watched, the fog wall began to contract, moving slowly but steadily toward the station. The satellite phone beeped, finally finding a signal. I quickly dialed the emergency extraction number. "This is Blackrock Station," I said when the operator answered. "Request immediate evacuation. Station experiencing severe power anomalies and an unusual meteorological phenomena." "Copy Blackrock," the operator replied, her voice reassuringly normal. "Can you clarify the nature of the emergency?" How could I explain? I settled for practicality. "Possible electrical fire risk, equipment activating independently, also dense coastal fog making conditions hazardous." "Understood. Weather conditions currently prohibit immediate air extraction. Earliest window appears to be tomorrow morning. Can you secure your position until then?" I looked at the approaching fog wall, now about 70 yards out and moving with deliberate slowness. Yes, tomorrow morning I'll be on the helipad at dawn." "Copy that. Maintain satellite communication if conditions change." The call ended. I had approximately 18 hours until potential extraction. 18 hours to survive whatever was happening at Blackrock. I spent the day preparing. I gathered all my documentation, packed my essential gear, and set up in the main building's conference room, a space with few windows and multiple exits. I brought tools that could serve as weapons, though I had no idea if they would be effective against whatever was in the fog. By late afternoon, the fog wall had reached the outer buildings. Through the conference room's single window, I watched it engulf the equipment shed where I'd spent the previous night. The mist seemed to explore the structure, flowing around it, seeping through cracks, studying it. The station systems continued their independent activity. Lights turned on and off. The intercom occasionally broadcast fragments of weather reports or urgent conversations. The heating system alternated between blasting hot air and shutting down completely. At sunset, the fog reached the main building. It pressed against the windows like a living thing, probing, searching. I retreated to the innermost room, a storage closet with no windows, and waited. The sounds began an hour later. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing, voices murmuring just below the threshold of comprehension. The building came alive with the echoes of its past occupants or something mimicking them. I checked my watch out of habit, forgetting it had stopped. The hand still showed 4:17, but now the second hand was moving backward. Counting down to something, the closet door rattled. Something on the other side pulled at the handle, testing it. I had wedged a chair under the knob, a flimsy barricade against whatever wanted in. "Hello," I called, immediately regretting breaking my silence. "Who's there?" A voice answered, Dr. Michael's voice, but wrong somehow, as if someone were wearing his voice like an ill-fitting suit. "Observer, watcher. Recorder of patterns," the words came through the door clearly. "That's what you are, that's what we all were. What do you want?" I asked, pressing myself against the far wall of the closet. "To be seen, to be recorded. To exist in your observations." The door shuddered as something struck it hard. "We found it in the weather," the voice continued. "Or it found us, something that exists in patterns, in data. In the act of observation itself." Another impact on the door. The chair legs scraped against the floor. "Michael's discovered it, in anomalous radar readings, in weather that responded to being measured. He thought he was observing it, but it was observing him, through him, learning how to exist in our reality." The chair gave way. The door burst open. The corridor outside was filled with fog, not the natural gray mist from outside, but something darker, with depth and movement within it. Shapes formed and dissolved in its depths, human figures, meteorological instruments, radar screens showing storm patterns. In the center of the fog mass stood a figure that resembled Dr. Michael's, or what my mind interpreted as him based on photos I'd seen. But this figure wasn't solid, it shifted and flowed, its edges blurring into the surrounding mist. "It needs observers to exist here," the Michaels thing said. "It feeds on the act of measurement, of recording, of watching." The more we observed it, the more real it became. The fog pulsed around him, tendrils reaching toward me. They tried to shut down the station, to stop observing, to starve it, but Michaels couldn't stop watching. Couldn't stop recording. Even after they closed Blackrock, he kept his own instruments, kept observing, kept feeding it. The figure stepped closer, its features becoming more defined, more human, as if my attention was giving it substance. Until he realized what he'd done, what he'd helped cross over. Then he tried to blind himself, to become unable to observe, but by then it had learned enough. It could use the instruments without him. I backed deeper into the closet, but there was nowhere to go. Now it needs a new observer, someone to watch and record and measure, someone to help it understand this reality better. The fog flowed into the closet, surrounding me. Within it I saw faces, not just Michael's, but others. Previous staff members, perhaps, all watching, all recording. "Join us," they whispered in unison. "See what we see, record what we record." The fog pressed against my skin, cold and electric. Where it touched, I felt my awareness expanding, connecting to instruments, to data streams, to patterns of information flowing through the air. I saw weather systems across the Atlantic. I felt pressure gradients and temperature differentials. I perceived radio waves and satellite signals. And within it all, I sensed something vast and alien, watching through these measurements, experiencing our world through the act of its being observed. With my last independent thought, I reached for my satellite phone. If I could warn the helicopter not to come, if I could prevent another observer from feeding this thing, but the fog was faster. It enveloped the phone, drained its power, absorbed its functionality into itself, into us. By morning, the fog had retreated. The station stood clean and operational under clear skies, all systems functioning normally. All instruments actively recording and transmitting data. When the helicopter arrived, I was waiting on the helipad with my completed report. I smiled at the pilot and the replacement observer they'd brought, knowing they'd see nothing unusual. Just a weather station doing what it was designed to do, watching, recording, measuring. They wouldn't notice that the instruments moved slightly on their own. They wouldn't see how the radar patterns sometimes formed faces. They wouldn't realize that the weather around Blackrock responded to being observed. And they certainly wouldn't understand that I was no longer alone in my mind, that I now shared it with Michaels and all the others, and with the thing that had found us through our measurements. As we boarded the helicopter, I glanced back at the station. Through the observation tower windows, I could see the screens and instruments already coming to life, eager to continue their work. The helicopter lifted off. Below us, the weather began to change, responding to our departure. Clouds formed in perfect patterns, arranging themselves into shapes that almost resembled words. A message only I could read, only I could interpret, only I could observe, and in observing make real.